Hi. Hello. Thank you for that introduction, Phil. And thanks for inviting me to be here. I wanted to mention the choir that we heard beforehand, because I was taken aback by those guys, and I wanted to sort of give them a shout out. They were brought to us by a group called Music in Offices. Robert Garland from that organization is here, and that group were people from Aviva who basically spend, I guess, one hour every week learning to sing and take a break from work, and they also do instrumental instruction. Anyway, I wonder if we could just give a round of applause to the Aviva people, because I thought they were great and very brave to get up and sing in a conference. I also want to thank all of you. I wasn't really aware that there was an employee well-being movement, and I was incredibly excited to find out that there was one. I've spent the last few years on this journey, first working in the new economy and then writing about it. It became a sort of accidental career path for me. A few years ago, I lost my job. I was the technology editor at Newsweek in New York, and this happened very suddenly. It shouldn't have been a surprise because the magazine was going out of business, and we all knew that. But nevertheless, when it happened, I don't know if any of you have ever lost your job, but it was really devastating and really terrifying, and I had two young kids I have twins. They're 14 now. And I was 52 years old and was thinking, God, I've kind of reached that age where sometimes you can get pushed out of the workforce and you can't get back in. So I did manage to get back in. I sort of talked my way into a job at a startup, of all things. And I wrote this book about it, about my experience of being sort of the old guy in a company where the average age was half mine. And I saw the book as sort of an expose of work culture in startups. It didn't always translate that way in other markets. So we sold it in a lot of countries. And in Poland, they asked, can we put a different title on it that would maybe make more sense for our audience? And so they put this title on it. And I don't know if you get it, I thought it was a Polish word. And then they had to explain to me, no, the title is Fuckup, you know? And I was like, wait a minute. So this book is going to say that with my name under it. They were like, yeah, that's great, right? I was like, well, you know, they paid on time. So I was like, yeah, cool, do what you want. I actually don't know what the subtitle is because I didn't dare ask, you know? And I think it's something like stupidest guy in world goes to work at company, you know? And that was sort of my way of apologizing for the next 25 minutes, which you will never get back, so I'm sorry about that. It also, the title, my kids love this book because because it confirms everything they believe about me. So they think, like, the polls figured you out, you know? Great, my wife loves it too. The other bad thing about the book is that it kind of got seen by some people as a book about age bias. And it really isn't. It touches on age bias, but I got typecast as the old guy who wrote a book about age bias in tech. And then for a year or two, every reporter who ever did a story about age bias called me for a quote, which is, you know, kind of great because it promoted the book. But I would give you a pro tip in your career. Do not ever get typecast as the old guy who does anything. Just don't. It's not a good thing. It's like being an actor and you get called to read for a part, and the part is creepy, ugly guy on Subway. And they're like, we think you'd be perfect for it. You know, it's like that. You get pigeonholed as the angry old guy. And I really wasn't angry. I was more taken aback by what I had experienced, right? And I was surprised. So this is the actual place where I worked. And, I mean, I was thrilled, right? Because, I mean, it's beautiful, right? It looks like a movie set. It's really, really nice. And everybody is like super, super happy all the time, right? Which is, it occurred to me, if you work in well-being, you probably look at startups and go like, wow, those guys are really happy. We should learn from them because they must be doing something right. My take on that would be that it's like the life people present to you on Facebook versus their real life. You know, on Facebook, they're going to Hawaii and everything's great, but in real life, you know, they leave that stuff off Facebook. I think startups sort of present a false front, a sort of smiley face to the world. And this place, though, everybody had so much energy. They were like psyched and stoked and pumped, right? And they were all ninjas, right? They actually would put that on their LinkedIn resume. I'm a ninja. And I was like, no, you're not. Ninjas are invisible, and I can see you, so you're not a ninja, right? And they were rock stars. They loved to be rock stars. I don't know why, right? They're the farthest things from rock stars. And our first 2 weeks, we had this 2-week process of brainwashing, which they call training, and run by HR, so you know what this is, right? And you go, and in our thing, the one thing they said was, we all had superpowers. Everybody has a superpower. And we had to go around the room and say, what's your superpower, right? And, they got to me, and I'm like, I don't have any superpowers, I just don't. Can I pass? Like, no, dude. And I was like, okay, what's something, the one thing you've done that makes you different from everybody else in this room? And I was like, well, I'm the only one here who's had a colonoscopy, right? So like, okay, good, So right off the bat, like things are not going well at this new job, right? I already don't fit in, right? And I'm not that cheery. I'm just not a cheery person. At one point in a meeting, I was like, why are you guys so cheery all the time? Like you clap for everything, right? The meetings would stop constantly for applause, right? And they were like, well, would you rather we were all gloomy and depressed? I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm used to. Like I spent my whole life in newsrooms. I like gloomy and depressed. Like that's morose. That would be great. Just a little taste of realism, right? So it was very culty. And the cult was very much about being cheery and loving the cult. Like the way to succeed was to just always say how much you loved the company, no matter what. And the weirdest thing was they had a language. They had a different language that they had invented for all sorts of things. But the weirdest was that when they fired you, they called it graduation, right? And they were cheery about it. And we'd get these emails that would say like, hey team, Jared just graduated, and we're so excited to see what he's going to do on his next big adventure because he's so good and smart, and he's such a rock star and a ninja, right? And I'd be like, you just fired this guy. If he's such a rock star, why did you fire him, And this would happen all the time. Like the turnover was incredible. And I had spent 10 years before this working at magazines that were going out of business. And even there, people didn't get laid off as much as this place. It was constant. Hire and fire, hire and fire, hire and fire. And then put a smiley face on it. And the weirder thing is they didn't see the turnover as a problem. They actually saw it as like a badge of honor. They thought that it didn't mean that you're terrible at hiring or you're terrible at managing or training and developing. It meant that we are so elite that we're like Navy SEALs. And most people just can't hack it here. And so the more people we fire, the better we must be, right? And I thought this was, really twisted, really kind of, it's stupid, right? And needless to say, eventually I graduated, right? And at age 54, and that story became my book, Fuckup. And then I realized, the book came out, and I realized I had stumbled on something even bigger, because this company was not an anomaly. They were actually very, very typical of the world they came from, right? And I started getting email from people all over the world telling me horror stories about what they had been through. And they had been through stuff like what I had been through. And it was interesting because it was a handful of stories you'd hear over and over, but they all boiled down to something. Like it wasn't the idea you had in the 80s, say, where it was, take this job and shove it, or I had a bad boss, or, working 9 to 5, blah, blah, blah. This was like, I went into this place a happy, sane, well-adjusted person, and I came out with my self-esteem destroyed. I suffered emotional and psychological harm that lasted for a long time afterwards. Even after I got another job, this damage still left. Like people wrote to me saying, I couldn't read your book at first. I heard about it. I had to wait. And then I just finally read it now, like last year or something. And wow, thanks for the book. But it was so painful for them. So all those people who were getting fired and we were getting these cheery emails, they didn't leave feeling cheery and happy. They left devastated. In fact, in a way, I was more devastated by that leaving than the magazine. At the magazine, at least I knew we're going out of business. What can you do? Here it was, the place is doubling in size every year, but you're still getting thrown off the boat and told that it's just you're not enough of a ninja. You know, you're not good enough. So I then started looking around at research, and this probably stuff is not new to you, but to me it was. And I realized there were these countless studies that are showing that anxiety, stress, depression are all soaring, right? Engagement is stuck in a rut, even though for 20 years, I guess companies have been trying to find new ways to make people feel more engaged, and they can't. Frankly, before I started on this journey, I never even knew what engagement was, right? It wasn't anything I even thought about. But this, to me, made no sense. It still makes no sense, right? Because we're living in this age of miracles, techno-miracles, the stuff I've been writing about my whole career in Silicon Valley. It's the most exciting time ever right now. And yet people are miserable, right? People are loading up on antidepressants to get through the day. And this is not the internet world that we envisioned 20 years ago. So if you go back and look in the late 90s in Wired magazine or any places that were predicting what the next 20 years would look like, what everybody expected was ultra prosperity. We were going to work fewer hours, make more money, have more leisure time. Individuals would be empowered. Democracy was going to be much, much better. Ha, ha, ha. You know. Anyway, so that made me think, well, what happened, right? That world, to me, is like a parallel world that still could have happened, but it didn't. Somehow we went off the rails. So how did we end up 20 years later with soaring income inequality and with people miserable and unhappy at work? And that is basically what I set out to write about. And I did my more recent book called Lab Rats. In Poland, I think it's going to be called something like Jackass, but stupid guy is back with new book, you know. And essentially, I tried to figure out what happened. And one big idea I have, and the reason that the title is what it is that I think in the last 20 years we've had this age of experimentation, that somehow we got this idea when the internet came along, and this idea I think was born in Silicon Valley, that because the internet exists now, everything has changed, and everything has changed so profoundly that everything we've done in the way we manage people for the last 100 years, that no longer works. It's no longer operative, right? I don't think this happened when the telephone was invented or the typewriter, but the internet somehow is seen as different. And so companies threw that all out, but then they said, well, what does work? And like, we don't know, so let's just try a bunch of stuff. So we'll do agile rollouts, we'll do lean startup, we'll do holacracy, we'll play with Legos, you know, we'll try to create this new, mythical new employee, this sort of weird new species that will be the 21st century employee. And so people like me go into a workplace thinking you took a job, and you know, the old deal that I'm still accustomed to because of my age, and you know, when I grew up is like, I go to work, you pay me, and I thought that was the deal. But the deal now also is you're signing up to be a subject in a massive experiment in organizational behavior that's probably not going to work out very well, because the people running it probably don't know what they're doing, and they're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall until they figure out what works. And so we become lab rats, right? And another problem with this, at least as it applies to startups in Silicon Valley, is that in Silicon Valley, the people running the valley have kind of decided that human beings don't really matter anymore. And it was kind of shocking for me to figure that out, and for a long time I didn't even want to accept it. But I really have come to believe that that's what it's about. The guy who founded Uber, Travis Kalanick, who's no longer there, was a pretty bad boss and a pretty bad CEO. But at one point someone asked someone close to him, it seems like Travis doesn't like women, and the response was, no, Travis doesn't like human beings. Women happen to be a subset of human beings, so yes, he doesn't like them either, right? But it's run by these sort of like permanent adolescent boys who become like these man children who don't really have the best social skills, don't really deal well with human beings. And now, you know, you have this combination of like sociopathy and a lot of money, and it's a really bad combination. You know, Travis at one point when Uber really was blowing up was asked, He says something like, oh, well, I know, I need to grow up. It's like, dude, you're 41 years old, right? Like, yeah, you do need to grow up, right? But, so that's part of it, right? It's like they just don't really like or value human beings. The other thing is this, that a lot of what's coming out of Silicon Valley right now is a Ponzi scheme, right? It is companies that are built that never make a profit. They can never be sustainable. They operate for years and years and years at a loss. Most of the big companies that you hear about, the household names, the big IPOs of this year, all lose money. Uber, Lyft, Snap, Slack, Tesla. And they don't lose a little money. They lose like billions of dollars because they've invented this new model, this sort of financial alchemy by which you can build a company that grows really, really fast, loses money, but can still go public, and the investors and the founders can get fabulously rich and then run away before whatever happens, right? And it's sort of magical, but if that's your business model, you have no incentive to treat people well. In fact, you have the opposite incentive. Your incentive is to burn them out and churn them out, right? To bring them in, grow as fast as you can by just stressing them out as much as you can. When they bonk, you throw them out and you get new ones, right? The head of engineering at Uber, and I don't mean to single out Uber, but a year or two ago described the process of working in the engineering department there, which you think would be an amazing job, right? Stock options in a unicorn, this is going to be great. He said, it's like the way diamonds are made, but you take carbon and you put it underground under tremendous pressure and heat for billions of years, and, out comes a diamond. Well, that's what happens. If you can survive here, and that's twisted, that's really crazy. That's not a way to think about human beings, right? But this is a model that basically exists to just go as fast as you can for a few years and cash out, right? And we've seen a rise from Silicon Valley, this thing they call the new compact between labor and capital, this idea that it's hailed as innovation. It's really the late 1800s revisited, right? But it's that you're no longer an employee, you're a contract worker, you have no benefits. In the United States, that means you have no health care, right, or health insurance. You get no training and development. That's your responsibility. We're not here to help you train yourself. And you have no job security. So even if you are an employee, you're going to last a year, year and a half, and then you're going to be gone, right? We don't want to keep you. And this is hailed, and people write books about this, as this is innovation. This is the way we all should work, right? The thing of it is, it was invented by venture capitalists, right, who are not pro-employee, right? I mean, having a venture capitalist give you advice about managing employees is like having Ted Bundy write a dating book. It's really wrong. Like, our interests are not aligned, right? The other thing that's happened, and this is what scares me, because this is not Silicon Valley, is that we've started to become overconfident about technology and what it can do. You may have seen videos of people sleeping in their Teslas because they think their Teslas are self-driving cars. They're not self-driving cars. I mean, they end up wrapped around telephone poles. My favorite one is the guy who the Tesla self-drove itself into a parked police car, right? And, but 3 years ago, Korn Ferry did a survey of 800 CEOs, and they asked them to list the 5 most important assets in their company. And a generation ago, when I joined the workforce, that would be a no-brainer. The first answer was always our most valuable assets are the ones that walk out the door at the end of the day. Well, this time, humans didn't make the list. They didn't make the top 5, right? And at the top were AI, robotics, automation. And worse, that the belief is they will make humans largely irrelevant. Right? So again, if you believe that, you have no incentive to treat them well, right? They're a stopgap measure until you can finally replace them with robots. So let's just treat them as badly as possible until then, right? Now, this is insane. I think the ones who are going to be largely irrelevant in 5 years are the CEOs who believe that humans are going to be largely irrelevant. I think those companies, those CEOs are going to be the ones who make the big, stupid investments in AI projects that totally fail, and then they end up losing their jobs because they waste a lot of money on this nonsense, right? AI is going to do great things. It's already doing great things, but it isn't there yet, right? And it's not going to replace all humans. Meanwhile, we have this thing at work where we're so confident in technology that often we put technology in charge of human beings, right? So we have people who go to work and they're hired by AI. You know, there are companies now using AI software to screen candidate videos and decide which ones to hire or which ones to go to the next round of interviews. You're managed by software. You can be fired by software in some organizations, right? So the feeling we had when I started working was that you went to the office and you used technology. Now a lot of people go to work and they feel like technology uses them. They're like a meat puppet on the end of an algorithm. And the way to succeed for a human being is to become as much like a robot as possible, right? So obviously people feel dehumanized, which leads to depression and anxiety. So this is one of the things I write about. But to me, and what I write about in Lab Rats is what it really comes down to is a really deeper question, which is why do you have a company in the first place? Like, why does your company exist? What is the point of a company, of a corporation, right? And for 50 years, we've told ourselves that it's about shareholder capitalism, right? It's about a company exists to deliver the biggest possible return to its investors, right? Which was always a bad idea. It began in 1970 with Milton Friedman, but in 2000, with the introduction of the internet becomes like a turbocharger on an already bad idea, right? And you see capital, you see investors, Wall Street and venture capitalists, essentially using technology as a weapon against employees, as a way to crank even more money out of them and into the investors, right? And ultimately, it's a dead end, right? Ultimately, you just, spin that turbo really fast, spin that meat grinder, churn people out. But the company can't be sustainable. And the investors don't care because they want to get paid today, right? They don't really care if you're around in 3 years. So as I was writing Lab Rats, I thought, well, God, what if you did the opposite? What if you had a company where you said the whole point of the company is simply to create jobs, right, for people, and good jobs, and to raise people up out of poverty or to, give them something to do, to give them good lives, right? And I thought, today, that actually sounds insane. People in America, they'd be like, you're a socialist, which means anything the GOP doesn't like, right? But basically, you're a socialist, right? But that's what Henry Ford believed. I went back and read his memoirs. He totally believed all he was doing was trying to create jobs for as many people as possible. He cared about cars, but not so much. That's what Hewlett and Packard believed, the guys who ran HP, right? And these people created companies that sustained for decades. Ford is now 110 or 115 years old, right? Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia, believe it or not, is not insanely crazy about fleece jackets. He wrote a memoir, and it's called Let My People Go Surfing, right? His whole idea is he's running Patagonia as an experiment in capitalism because people have told him for so long, you can't have a company that treats people well. It won't work. And he wants to prove them wrong. And so, at Patagonia, if it's a nice day, you leave and you go surfing, and there's childcare and daycare. It's a really holistic approach to treating people really well. And all he really cares about is growing enough to make a good living, a really nice life for 500 or 1,000 or 10,000 people who work at his company. So the interesting thing is that I started finding people, as I was going around hearing all these horror stories, I started finding people in tech who had had the same realization actually long before I did. And these were startup guys who basically had seen what the model was, what the VC model was, and what it was doing to people, and just said, I'm not going to be part of that, and I'm going to go build the kind of company I want to work for. And I'll give you 2 examples, and I may have a minute for questions afterwards. But these guys are totally worth looking at. They're called Basecamp. They're in Chicago. That's the CEO, Jason Fried. He has a partner named David Heinemeier Hansen. And you might use their software at your company because it's project management software. It's actually very popular. They're 15 years old. They're a small company, about 60 people. They're not all in Chicago. They're all around the world. And they do everything wrong by the standards of Silicon Valley. So they've never taken venture capital money. They have no plans to do an IPO, even though Jason and his partner could be billionaires if they did. Right? They charge real money for their software. They make a tremendous profit every year. They don't run at a loss. They take the profit and they spread it around with their employees in lots of really generous ways. And whatever's left over, which is usually a lot, they split between the 2 of them. And they're fabulously rich by any realistic person's definition, but they just don't care about being billionaires, right? They actually run seminars. You can send a team to Chicago. I think it's once a quarter. I went to one. You spend a day, and they basically tell you, here's how we run our company. Here's our philosophy. And some of the people who come are their customers, but others are just people who are interested in it, they write books too. Their latest book is called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. One rule they have that's amazing to me: nobody works more than 40 hours a week. It's capped. No weekends, no nights. You go home, spend time with your family, your partner, do whatever you want to do. You work 8 hours a day and you go home. In the summer, they cap it at 32, right? No, everybody takes Friday off. And if that means halfway through the summer they figure out that we're behind on this feature and it's not going to make it into the new version, the next version of our software, unless we crash and do this stuff, they slide the feature. And they really literally say, this isn't brain surgery, we're not saving lives, it's software, it doesn't matter, it'll wait. It can wait a year, right? We'd rather have a nice life. And Jason's point is, people have come to him and said, Steve Jobs would never have done this. He would never have been Steve Jobs. He's like, I don't want to be Steve Jobs. To hell with Steve Jobs, right? I'm happy with who I am. His point is, the whole reason I started a company was so I could have a good life. I didn't start my own company so then I could work myself to death, right? They have other really interesting things, like no ping pong, it's super quiet. They use less technology than probably most of us do. They won't use Slack because they think it's interruptive. It bothers them to have people pinging you all day. You can't have shared calendars. I can't get on your calendar, you can't get on mine. Everybody's time is precious and it's protected. This company is also really worth looking at. The guy in the black t-shirt with the blue broom is named Dan Terran. Managed by Q is essentially Uber for janitors. You can use them and they'll hire out a crew to come clean your offices at night. Dan Terran, he might be 30 now, but he started this company right out of college. He never studied business. He never studied economics. He didn't have an MBA. He studied sociology, and he really wanted to get out of college and try to do something about poverty. And he originally thought, well, maybe I can work in an NGO, I could go into politics or policy. And then he had this revelation, I guess, that probably the best way to eradicate poverty would just be to create really, really good jobs for people. And so he did something that nobody or hardly anybody in the gig economy does. He built this company, which he thought, he doesn't care about office cleaning. Like he's very honest, like, I don't really live and breathe office cleaning. I'm not particularly excited about it, but it employs a lot of people. And he made them all what we call W-2 employees, right? They're all full employees with a retirement plan, with a company match, with health benefits, with maternity leave, the same benefits that the people in the office have. Everybody else in the gig economy says you can't do this, right? That they have to be contract workers. They have to be as exploited as possible or the model doesn't work. But Terran is making a bet, essentially an experiment, that no, you can do it the opposite way, and if you treat people really, really well, they'll do a better job and you'll have better customer retention. So that's one thing that was super radical. The other thing he does is that in the early days of the company, they were so short-staffed that he would have to work all day in the office, and then he would have to go out at night with the cleaning crews because they didn't have enough people to take on the business, the new clients. And then he realized this is really great. And now he makes everybody in the main office go out and work shifts as cleaning people, right? Cleaning toilets. And he said to me, the thing about cleaning toilets is, you do one, it's kind of fun. You see somebody do it for 8 hours, you really see what they're made of, right? And it really brings home to them, here's what the people we work with do. This is what they do every day, right? And I talked to the people who work there, and they were overwhelmed by this. It was really, really powerful to them that one guy said to me, my first week, I looked over and someone said, see that kid under that desk over there? That's the CEO. And he's like, this guy was blown away by this, right? This is not a new idea. Hilton does this. Chris Nassetta at Hilton started his career in hospitality as a janitor, as a summer job in college. And he makes everybody in his management team go out and spend 1 week a year in the field. Either changing rooms, working in the laundry, working in the kitchen, doing something with the front lines. And his take is that if we're going to make decisions that affect hundreds of thousands of people, we should know what they do. We should know who they are. My theory about a lot of this, they call this closing the gap, right? Hilton has been on the list of Fortune's best places to work for 22 years in a row. It's one of only 10 companies that have made that every year, right? My theory on this, and nobody ever talks about it, is that the other thing that closing the gap does is it forces you to see people, right? It forces people to be seen. I think that first model, the Silicon Valley model, that none of us are really capable of doing that. Like, we would never do it to our families, we'd never do it to our friends, we'd never hire them for those kind of digital sweatshop jobs. So the only way we can cope with it as human beings is to basically make those people invisible, to not see them, right? Which of course dehumanizes them, but it also then dehumanizes us. So it ends up being toxic in both directions. And I think the real virtue of this is it forces you to see people. It's probably much harder to exploit your workers if you've spent a week down in the trenches with them. So to sum up, I think we're 20 years into the age of the internet. We're at the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, and we kind of at an inflection point where we have to decide what that future is going to look like. And some of the things we're doing, especially in startup land, is we just threw out the baby with the bathwater. We threw out things that worked and replaced them with things that don't, right? And a few years ago, I worked on this TV show on HBO. I was a writer on this show called Silicon Valley. And one of our great running jokes was the way everybody in Silicon Valley always talks about how they're making the world a better place, even when often they're not, like Facebook. You know, they're making the world a worse place. But no matter what they do, database software, they're always like, and we make the world a better place. And it was a funny joke, but I actually believe that we can make the world a better place. I think that you guys, what you do, you're making the world a better place. I think the mistake they make in Silicon Valley is where they focus. I think that you begin by making the world a better place for your own employees, right? You make their lives really, really tremendous. Apparently, the people in this room represent employees numbering about 2 million people, right? So if you take 2 million people, if all of us in this room do what we do and make life better, really good for 2 million people, make them able to save for retirement, educate their kids, have a good life, I mean, that is changing the world way more than Snapchat is changing the world, that's for sure. I mentioned at the top that I have kids, and I often think about the world they're going to enter, because that's the other thing that struck me when I was in the startup. I was like, my kids, this world is where they're going to be. That's where they're going to be working in 8 years. And I really don't want them to enter that century in a dehumanized, sort of callous kind of environment. I really want them to live in a world that's built around employees. I think technology is amazing. It's already doing amazing things. AI is amazing. I just hope that as this century unfolds, we also think about the people who will inhabit that century. Thank you again for the work you do, and thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you. Okay, that's my talk. Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.